what does Dr. Fitness want to talk about this week? A lot of things. Seeing that I'm close to 70 years of age, I've got a lot of things to talk about. One of them is exercise for older people. I had an enlightening phone call the other day. I had a short break at work because I work with training people, particularly in our age group, boomers and older and some younger. And I don't normally answer the phone, but I did on this occasion. And a gentleman who listens to my show called, and he was inquiring about my program and what we did, and he'd like to come see me. So during that conversation, what came up was the fact that he had been with a trainer in the past, and he was, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he was going through therapy now for an injury that occurred working with the trainer. And, he heard my show, and he heard me talk about how we work with the aging body, because we have one. And his trainer evidently was trying to use an excessive amount of weight, with the object of increasing muscle mass. And the reason why I say it is because the gentleman used the term hypertrophy, and that means growth, muscle growth. And that's not a normal term that the average person would use unless he heard it from somebody who would use it. That would be a trainer or somebody, who knows anatomy, things like that. And so he explained to me that the trainer wanted him to use an excessive amount of weight, doing some shoulder exercises, and he, for 2 or 3 reps. Well, 2 or 3 reps for somebody who's, 25, 30, 35, maybe even 40 is acceptable with heavy weight. But when you get to be my age, and he was 63, I believe. By the way, he's coming in to see me this week. You don't do that kind of crap. Pardon my French. Can I say that, Connor? It's allowed? Okay. That's how you increase your injuries for people in our age group. So we're not being serviced properly, seniors, in your fitness facilities. So I asked him what the age of the trainer was. I think it'd be upper 20s, maybe 30 below that. And we're not being serviced properly in your centers, working with trainers who don't really have a lot of experience working with older people like me. And so injury occurs in these individuals. And when we're injured, what can you not do? You can't exercise. So if you're going to get yourself a trainer, get a trainer who works with older people. I hate to use that term older because I don't feel like I'm older. I'm seasoned. Put it that way. So get yourself someone who knows the aging body and will listen to you, because one of the things that trainers have a problem with is listening. They don't pay attention to what their client is saying to them, their needs and their wants and their goals. And this young man was an example of that problem. He thought, well, he wants to build muscle. Let's do 2 to 3 reps of what with heavy weight like he would do. Well, it doesn't work with seniors. Injuries occur. Sprains and strains. So I pull up an article to share with you. The number one injury you need to avoid after 60, says science. Fact. No matter how fit we are, our bodies will inexorably begin to feel the wear and tear of time. That means we're all more susceptible to aches, pains, and injuries as we grow older. The good news is that exercise helps, especially for older adults looking to maintain robust health, mobility, and independence for as long as possible. According to the study published in Sports Medicine, most physically active elderly people are selective individuals who respect to their superior health and physical capacity compared with inactive persons of the same age, thus making it possible to further improve their physical capacity. As long as an older adult maintains a consistent exercise schedule, that means go in when you're supposed to, they're set for smooth sailing, right? Unfortunately, it isn't quite so simple. The same study continues by stating those over 60 will, however, be affected by some of the drawbacks of physical overloading, like this gentleman did, due mostly to diminished ability of the aging body systems to adapt to high levels of loading. It means excessive weight. The safety margin of exercise dose tends to decline with aging. In other words, we can't do as much. Exertional injuries are common among the elderly and are connected mostly with degenerative aging processes. So exercise for adults over 60 represents something of a double-edged sword. It absolutely is necessary, but can also result in a number of nasty injuries if the proper precautions aren't taken. That being said, the question remains, what is the number one injury older adults need to avoid in order to stay physically active for as long as possible? It just so happens to also be the most common. It says to read on to find out what they are. Number one injury, leg muscle strains. The study referenced above also concludes that muscle injuries are the most common health problem reported by older adults who exercise, particularly muscle strains located in the lower extremities, from the hips to the toes. This conclusion is reinforced by another research project published in the British medical journal Open, for which scientists tracked the number of older adults with an average age of just under 70. Among those who suffered an exercise-related injury, 41% occurred in the legs, and the most common injury was a muscle strain. That's from overload, too much weight. One may assume that the study participants strained their leg muscles performing intense cardio or heavy weights, but casual walking actually caused half of the reported injuries. That means they're out of shape. Making matters worse, 44% couldn't return to physical activity after hurting themselves, with some being forced to remain immobile for up to 6 months. What causes muscle strain? Harvard University tells us that muscle strain is the stretching or tearing of muscle fibers. Now, let me say this. Joints are made to move through a certain range of motion, determined by the length of the ligament of that joint. As an example, the knee bends to about 150 degrees. If it goes past that point, what are you straining? In most cases, you're straining the muscles and spraining the ligaments. And when ligaments stretch, they don't go back to normal. That's a sprain. You don't want that. Then you suffer micro tears. Then you're in trouble. It says here, it is most often caused by either stretching a muscle beyond its limits or initiating a muscle contraction too strongly. This is why I'm not a proponent of stretching, because stretching doesn't work with muscular imbalances, which cause joint immobility, muscle stiffness and tightness, or joint, I should say. And there's no amount of stretching that fixes this problem. It's muscular balance. Each joint has multiple things that it does. Example, knee extends and it flexes. It bends and straightens out. So there has to be a balance between the front and the back of the leg. If one muscle is too strong and one's too weak, what happens? Muscle strain. It says here, some strains are more serious and damaging than others, but any muscle strain is going to be a bigger problem for older individuals. This research, published in the Journal of Sports Rehabilitation, states that a secondary injury response to and recovery from contractional-induced skeletal muscle injuries are impaired with aging. In other words, it's easier to suffer an injury if you're older, and it takes longer to fix it. So it's important that you, if you're going to exercise, that you get with somebody who knows the aging body, and they've worked in this field for a long time, not somebody just freshly certified as a trainer, because there's 135 certification organizations in this country or more. Anybody can get certified. You can never have worked out in your life and you can get certification. They teach you the basics. And then a lot of these younger people, because they get bored working with older people like me, because we're sort of restricted in what we can do, they'll give them risky exercises. In fact, there's been times when your trainers will stick a person on a big old exercise ball and do squats on the top of the ball. Get that one. Squats on the top of an exercise ball. You know what can happen then? fall off, break a bone, or hurt themselves worse. Welcome back to The Good Life. Lance Dreher, Dr. Fitness. That's me. If you're a first-time listener, let me introduce myself to you. I'm a former Mr. America, Mr. Universe twice from the 1980s, a whole bunch of titles. Also a certified life coach. I'm also I was a student, personal friend of mine, of the gentleman who coined the term core exercise. All the people that are out there doing core, they have no idea where this comes from. Well, it comes from the guy that I was an understudy for 4,000 hours and was a personal friend from the time I was 17 years of age. Okay, and this guy, all the corrective movements that are done by your physical therapist, the majority of them are from Bob Gajda. Okay, and I thank God the day I met this man when I was 17. Anyhow, the phone number here is 602-260-5394. If you have a question or comment, we're talking about exercise right now. At the bottom of the hour, we're talking more about food. And to refer back to the study I was talking about a moment ago, it says why older muscles take longer to heal. It says research from Carnegie's Science published in Nature's Medicine uncovered that older muscles likely have such a tough time recovering after strain due to deterioration of specific protein over time responsible for maintaining muscle stem cells. It says when a young person injures a muscle, those stem cells kick into action and get to work. Older individuals don't experience as robust a response from their muscular stem cells. Inefficient muscular healing in the elderly is a significant clinical problem, and therapeutic approaches are much needed, especially given the aging population. It says a longer road to rejuvenation of older adults following muscle strain, especially in the lower body, can spell disaster for both mobility and independence. Besides the usual muscle strain symptoms, including pain, swelling, bruising, and soreness, the Mayo Clinic reports these injuries can also result in muscle weakness and reduced range of motion. This is where range of motion exercise is so critical. You're seeing more professional athletes doing dynamic range of motion movements. You see them taking longer steps. That comes from the guy I trained under. He did this back in the 1970s and taught us that back then. It says muscle loss with age, scientifically termed sarcopenia, is already a very common problem for all older individuals, regardless of injury, as is reduced mobility to varying degrees. The National Institute of Aging reports older adults with limited mobility are less likely to live independently and are at greater risk of disease, hospitalization, and death. Exercise is supposed to keep us young and agile. Well, for those over 60, a muscle strain from exercising may represent a potentially devastating setback that will leave the individual in worse condition, less capable of living the life they want than getting off the couch, before getting off the couch. So it's right there. Proof is in the pudding. We need it, but you need the right kind, seniors. And when I say seniors, I'm referring to people over 60. Now, you can strain a muscle at any age, but we have more elasticity at a younger age than we do when we're older. We just don't have the same mobility. That's why it's so important to make sure you're doing range of motion exercises and movement, not stretching. This is from Mayo Clinic. It says, consider skipping stretching before an intense activity such as sprinting or track or field activities. Some research suggests that pre-event stretching may actually decrease performance. Research has also shown that stretching immediately before an event weakens hamstring strength. And you see a lot of professional athletes straightening their hamstrings. They're doing too much stretching. It's what happens to older people. We need movement. When you do movement, what happens? You increase joint lubricants, increase blood flow, and you increase mobility. The mobility comes because from something called reciprocal inhibition. You say, what's that, Dr. Fitness? It's when I do one movement, the opposite movement relaxes, elongates. I'll use this term, and I don't use it often. It stretches the right way by getting the muscle, the opposite muscle action, to cause that stretch reflex within control of the muscular system. In other words, it won't go beyond a certain amount of motion based on the strength of the muscles. That's why we have more stiffness. You have muscular imbalances by doing repetitive activities. One direction. Example, a person sits a lot. Then they stand up. Oh, I can hardly straighten out. That's because certain muscles tighten from sitting. They shorten. In the case of sitting, the hip flexors that go from the inside of the groin to your lower back, from T12 to L5, they lift our leg up, from the hip up. And when they're completely open, they're at rest. But when we sit, it can shorten as much as 45 degrees or more. Okay. So when that happens and we stand, then that muscle tightens and pulls against what? Your lower back. And the hamstrings, they kick in then to prevent too much movement of the hips. So this is why it's so important to have the right exercise program designed for you. Because we do a lot of range of motion movement using resistance to increase mobility of the joints without injury or stress. Because it's bad enough when you strain a muscle, but sprain a joint's even worse. Because when you sprain a joint, you're straining ligaments. You're stretching them. And ligaments, I know the older people are listening to me out there, my age, know what taffy is. Taffy does not stretch. I mean, taffy doesn't go back to normal once you stretch it out. Ligaments are like that. So when you stretch a ligament, it doesn't go back. That's why it takes such a long time to heal once you sprain a joint. And you don't want to, look at the quarterback for the Cardinals. Blows his ACL out. It takes up to a year for that to heal properly. You know that? Because it's a tear of the ligament. It's a sprain. All right. So, when you look at meat, you'll say, well, my doctor said I should cut down on my meat intake because my cholesterol is going. Let me explain it this way. Fat doesn't cause your cholesterol to go up. You go, oh, that's what I was told. No, it doesn't. What causes your cholesterol to go up is insulin, because insulin tells the liver to make cholesterol. So you go, okay, what makes insulin go up? Carbohydrates. Okay, bread, rice, pasta, corn products, sweets, the standard American diet. It's geared to make your cholesterol go up. You know why? Someone's going to make money off you. Big Pharma? Yeah, big time. They like you because they're going to put you on a statin drug. What do statin drugs do? Increase your risk of what? Diabetes. They can. Studies have come out and proved that. Of course, the pharmaceutical industry doesn't like that, but can increase your risk of developing diabetes. If you're not a diabetic, you may become one when you're taking it. And if you are one, it can progress your disease further to get you on more medications. Now, who benefits from that? Big Pharma, drug companies. Just turn your TV set on in the morning. All kinds of commercials for drugs. Turn the radio on. All kinds of commercials for drugs in the morning. I know, because I have a radio on, have my TV on, nonstop. Marketing who? Baby boomers, middle-aged Americans with most medications. We're the ones they try to load up on this stuff. Well, they say, well, they tell me I need to have carbohydrates for energy. Not true. Your body's best source of energy are ketones, particularly beta-hydroxybutyrate. Butyric acid. Now, I'm going to ask you this question. If you had to choose between an inefficient fuel that leaves a trail of smoke and slowly damages your car, or a clean fuel that gives you more mileage and keeps your car running smoothly, it's a no-brainer to pick the second one. Well, you have to make the same decision when it comes to fuel your body runs on. This is from Perfect Keto, by the way. And guess what? Most people pick option A, the first one, every day. The human body can choose between two fuel sources. Now listen to this stuff real closely, please. Glucose from carbs and ketone bodies from fat. One ketone body called BHB, beta hydroxybutyrate, is a clean and effective fuel your body can use for energy. That you probably didn't hear about this before. Beta hydroxybutyrate is one of the key ketone bodies. So when a person's on a low-carb diet, they release this from storage. That's why they call it ketosis. That's where they say keto. Your body makes when running on fat instead of carbs. There's three main ones. Your BHB, this is the most abundant, making up to 78% of your total ketones in the blood. Acetoacetate makes up 20% of the ketones in the blood, and acetone, the least abundant, makes about 2%. It's not used for energy, the last one. Says your body makes two types of BHB. The DBHB, which is the one your cells use for efficient energy, and is produced in high amounts, is responsible for anti-aging effects of BHB. The other one is in lower quantities and can be used for energy as efficiently as BHB. It's more helpful in the synthesis of fatty acids. Ketosis is the metabolic state of using ketones. Here's the 10 reasons you should be on a low-carb diet. It enhances gene expression. A lot of benefits from BHB comes from the ability to optimize expression of genes, a.k.a. the way your cells interpret DNA. Now, a few years back, a Dr. Cynthia Kenyon, a geneticist, manipulated genes to control the aging process in earthworms. Yes. She almost won a Nobel Prize in medicine with this. She was able to isolate two genes, one to turn aging on and one to turn aging off. One was the Grim Reaper. That was the one that caused aging. And the other one was Sweet 16, the anti-aging. And she found during her studies that this was triggered by insulin. Turned on the Grim Reaper gene and turned off the Sweet 16 gene. Insulin does that. So when you're on a low-carb diet, you're in ketosis and using BHB, which you can take orally, by the way, it slows the aging down. It allows you to transcribe the genes properly. Next one, it supercharges cognitive function. Ketones are able to cross the blood-brain barrier easily and provide your brain with over 70% of its energetic needs. This is possible because your brain becomes extremely receptive to ketone bodies when there's not enough glucose around. In fact, numerous neurons consume a lot of BHB. The quick absorption improves brain function in many ways, including preservation of neurons and synapses, which improves memory, focus, attention, and learning. Fewer free radicals. Lower neuroinflammation, that means inflammation of the nervous system, brain. Lower risk of dementia. Reduced risk of depression and mood disorders. Improved cognition in people with dementia, including those with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. In one study, an increase in BHB, the ketone, in the brain 90 minutes after ingesting MCT oil, medium-chain triglycerides, improved paragraph recall in adults with impaired memory. Preliminary studies also show ketones can improve working of memory in young people and old subjects. One study found BHB, beta-hydroxybutyrate, has antidepressant and anti-anxiety-like effects because it prevents neuroinflammation of the hippocampus. It also kills inflammation. Okay? It also fights oxidative stress. It increases lifespan. Helps fight and prevent cancer. BHB can slow the growth of tumors because cancer cells can't use ketones well enough to grow and spread. This phenomenon is explained by Warburg's effect, which says cancer cells and tumors depend on glucose breakdown, glycolysis, to grow, in contrast to healthy cells that can use either glucose or ketones. Scientists exploited this weakness by taking away glucose and forcing cancer cells to depend on ketones, and it actually decreased tumors in many organs, including the brain, pancreas, and colon, because the cells were unable to spread. Improves insulin sensitivity, which can reverse diabetes. Optimizes heart health. All kinds of stuff. This happens naturally if you're on a low-carb diet. In other words, ketone. You're keto. Or low-carb. You can also take and buy this supplement orally, but you still need to watch the carb intake. Now, you hear me say this all the time. You don't want to have excessively low blood pressure. You need blood to go to the brain. Yes, the brain. And one of the things that happens as we get older is most people, my age group, are taking blood pressure drugs. Some 4 drugs at a time to keep the blood pressure down. But it can go too low. This is from Neuroscience News. Calf muscles and blood pressure can predict dementia risk. Researchers discuss how blood pressure can influence dementia risk and report raising diastolic blood pressure, that's the bottom number, through daily soleus, that's the calf muscle that we talked about a couple weeks ago with blood sugar. Yeah, helps blood pressure too, or calf muscle. Stimulation can help reverse signs of cognitive decline associated with aging. Decline in brain function often occurs as people age. People often worry about declining brain function is an inevitable part of growing old and can lead to dementia, but it is not. Many people do not experience age-related cognitive decline. Clinical studies have shown older individuals over many years have consistently demonstrated that chronically low blood pressure increases the risk of age-related or cognitive decline. Chronically low. For example, a study published in 2017 followed more than 24,000 people around for 27 years. This study showed that low blood pressure is a significant predictor of cognitive decline and probability of developing dementia. This is independent of age, gender, weight, cardiovascular, kidney, or diabetic status. Low blood pressure is associated with decreasing blood flow to the brain when an individual is sitting or standing. Many researchers have come to believe that insufficient brain blood flow plays a critical role in the development of dementia. Alzheimer's and perhaps even Parkinson's, some believe that it may even play a role in play the primary role, meaning low blood pressure could be the primary reason. Those of us who study the link between low blood pressure and cognitive performance need to determine that what too low a blood pressure means in an individual person. This would allow healthcare professionals, providers, to know when to intervene and correct a person's low blood pressure. It goes on to say, in our research, we are utilizing data obtained from relatively new quantitative assessment cleared by the FDA and evaluating function in people over the age of 50 who have high school degree or higher education levels. It goes on to say that the level should be at 80. Not at 80, not your low 70s, okay, or 60s or 50s, at 80. This is a surprising role of the calf muscles. Low diastolic pressure can arise as a result of medication use, heart failure, and other health complications. But in most people, it is simply a matter of a heart not pumping out enough blood with each stroke. In other words, low cardiac output. A low cardiac output occurs when not enough blood is being returned to the heart from the lower body. The soleus muscle, remember the soleus push-up that we talked about? Specialized muscles in the middle of the lower leg are responsible for pumping blood back to the heart. The soleus muscles, specialized muscles in the middle of your lower leg, are responsible for pumping blood back to the heart. Over the last decade, our research team has demonstrated how the soleus muscles plays a critical role in maintaining normal blood pressure during sedentary activities. In other words, if you're sitting there with your knees bent, come up and down on your toes, up and down, up and down. Seniors, you can do that. Not hard to do. Not hard to do. While you're sitting in your chair, watching the Andy Griffin show or the Beverly Hillbillies, you can do soleus push-ups. All right.